questions that keep coming up, and we thought, what better way than to put our community in front of our co-founders and have a really good conversation. We have a big list of pre-submitted questions, but I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of live questions as well. So please feel free to ask any questions you may have. We have the full hour here to chat. And with me, I have Byung, who is our co-founder, and Rishab, who is our head of AI. Quinn unfortunately could not make this call today. And with that said, let's do a quick introduction for you, Byung, and Rishab, and then we'll jump right into the questions.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Byung. Thanks everyone for using Cody. Really appreciate you being a member of the community. Sorry for all the trouble around rate limits recently. I know that's been a huge pain. It's been a pain for us too. There's been a lot of abuse that we've kind of had to flag. But I think we have a handle on it now and kind of a path forward. And I just want to say we really appreciate your patience and all that. But more than that, I just want to say thanks for using Cody. It's a very kind of new early product. It's kind of improving and iterating quickly, and that sometimes means that things change. But we really appreciate having you all be a voice for our community, and it's really great to see people around the world using the tool that we're building. So thanks for joining. And then Rishab, do you want to say a few quick words? Rishab is awesome. He's our head of AI. He's responsible for fine-tuning a lot of the models that we're rolling out into production.
Thanks, Byung. Hi, everyone. I'm Rishab. I'm based in London. And yeah, thanks for all the feedback. I think we get a lot of amazing quality feedbacks from you guys, and it's been really helpful in helping us establish some good offline evaluation data sets, which we can see that, hey, any changes we are making to the prompt, to the context, with the LLM models, whether we are fine-tuning or using any of the others, just kind of, is it helping you guys be more productive as developers? Thanks for all the feedback, and really appreciate you guys using Cody.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you both for the introductions. And yeah, thank you, community, for being so passionate and raising a lot of the issues that you do. It is helping us create a better product for you. So with that said, let's get into some of the fun questions that we have submitted. And like I said, please feel free to submit questions in the chat. I see we already got a couple more coming in, and we'll address all of them on this call. So the first question we had was around visual modality. Will there be visual modality available in the near future? Sonnet 3.5 and Florence 2 via Olama are really strong at it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's something that we're thinking about actively. We have a team hackathon right now, and I know that one or two people are looking into it. It's not on the definite roadmap yet, but I think I'd be very surprised if within the next 6 to 12 months we didn't have some sort of visual input mechanism into Cody. And if any of you have a reference point, as a tool that you've used before that you think is really cool, or an idea for how this experience should go, please let us know. I think there's a couple of different variants that we've explored. Everything from tool use and using an actual production app and taking screenshots of that, at the one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is maybe we just embed something like Excalidraw or something into the UI, and then have people sort of draw the layout they want. But I'm curious to hear what other people want out of this, and if there's a specific sort of workflow or use case that you have in mind. Actually, if the person who asked that question, I don't know, can we bring people onto the stage? Yeah, if the person who asked that question wants to come on stage and chat, I see Prenova raised his hand. We can invite you on and chat about it.
Okay. Initially, the idea is for UA design in general. So for people who wants to design home pages or app design or UA, UX. That was my initial idea.
Cool. So were you thinking about drawing the layouts, or is it screenshot something, or something else?
The tools actually is like having a screenshot, and
Okay.
the LLM is able to reconstruct the screenshot. It's not only that, it's only for diagrams or whatever, for customizing diagrams.
Right. Okay, so you'd basically like draw your application in sort of like an external diagram or external design tool, and then you want to screenshot that and sort of like paste it into Cody, and then have Cody generate the HTML, CSS, or maybe like the basic React scaffolding.
Yes, exactly. So if there is a tool where I can directly translate the UI into code, like
Right.
I don't know the name from this tool, but you can draw your fields and it automatically convert it into code in the background.
That's cool. Yeah, that'd be kind of like almost like a low code way of building software
Yes.
in your editor. That's very cool. Then those of us who aren't like front end experts can actually get up and running without having to read through a bunch of docs or toil through a bunch of onboarding instances.
Yeah, for example, so you only click which framework you want to use, and everything happens in the background then. It's like
Yeah.
no code or low code programming. This is my favorite. So I'm more like a visual person. So
Yep.
also I'm using node editors or like a LangGraph, which you can only draw nodes and everything happens in the background then.
Interesting. So you'd want to kind of like draw your LangGraph thing and then have that convert that to like the actual configuration or the code that describes the graph structure.
Yeah, for example, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Actually, Rashab, I wonder if you have any thoughts about this, because I know your background is in context task
Yeah.
automation.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of like, hey, I mean, here is the UI and here is a part of things which I want you to focus on. So imagine like taking this as a visual input and saying that, hey, I mean, I'm not interested in the entirety. I'm just interested in this module. So maybe the context engine of Cody behind the scenes can double down. Oh, you mean this? Great. Let me focus on that. And I think like somebody asked this question on, hey, do we use the entire file, something else? And now with that visual input, you can probably provide a way to like for Cody to explicitly use that part of the code. Or it's like, hey, I mean, I don't want this in this color. I want it in some other color. So I think these are all examples of like, I think that input to guide what context Cody should be using, and then probably getting the code edit for you in the right way, essentially there. The other thing which this reminds me of is like, I mean, a lot of the work we've been thinking about, especially in chat, is about task and subtask. So you're trying to do a certain task, and there was like a few different subtasks over there. So I mean, the team, including Beyond, worked on an agentic setup as well, which is like, hey, how do we decompose the kind of complex thing you're trying to do into like a few steps and then pick up one step at a time? And I think one great learning which we had at the team was how do we like get human in the loop there, right? And human in the loop input over there is like a lot more useful and can kind of you can get to the end outcome a lot more quickly. So I think like even the visual input approach over there is also very interesting because we can incorporate specific feedback about where to focus, the context and the iteration, and even the changes, because what do you want change and what lines and what files do you want change? I think a lot of that could use the visual input as well. That's exciting, yeah.
That is awesome.
Cool.
And yeah, I'm also curious for other use cases. If you know, I feel like UI design and turning UI designs into code is one potential use case of vision, but are there other things that people would like to see Cody being capable of with vision, for example, just taking a screenshot of a log or other use cases other than like building, transforming UI designs from the design to code. If you have any, post them in the chat, and we can circle back. The next question: as an extension developer, can we have API access to the low-level API infrastructure, the LLMs, transcripts, etc., function tool calling to generate agentic workflows or activating the plugin system? Again, would be amazing for things like Langchain, LangGraph, React Flow integration, or similar
Yeah, so the short
Yeah.
answer is we are actively looking into this. It's something that's been requested by users and also a number of our customers. Like people really want to build against the Cody APIs. Because there's a lot of applications, frankly, that we haven't thought of or that don't fit neatly inside the editor that make use of like context plus LLMs. So it's an area of active work. It's not online yet. We're still kind of like doing design discovery on this because we want to make sure the API is high quality and not just, open up the kind of like internal messy hack together APIs as they are now. If folks want to, I mean, if you're impatient, there's always like the option of like digging through the code and hitting those API endpoints yourself. But if you're willing to wait a little bit longer, I think we can take your feedback on what you'd all like to see, and in particular, what you all would like to build against the API. That sort of target is really helpful because that helps kind of clarify through describing the then use cases, the shape of what we would need to build to satisfy what y'all are looking for. So does anyone want to come up and like talk through some of the ideas they have around what they want to build against the API?
Raise your hand if you do, and Justin will put you on stage.
It was Pranova who asked the question, so Pranova, go for it.
Might have stepped away from. Oh, there we go.
The idea behind is to have some node-based editor where my vision is to have LLM coding generation more coming in the background in the future. So you only have the primitive components where you can connect them, input, output, transformation in between, and you don't need to write code in the first hand. That's why direct low AP would be helpful for extending to not only to so I can avoid compiling Cody, the core components of Cody, so we can extend it through a plugin system or whatever extension is possible.
Yeah, is kind of the idea that you want to build some automation that automatically sort of like fixes bugs. Like we have customers that wants to use the API in sort of like a DevOps setting where you're kind of like reacting to events that happen in the software development lifecycle. Like if there's a bug that brings down prod or you observe a stack trace, could you automatically give that to an agent and have it try to fix the bug, reproduce, and then fix the bug? Is that kind of the thing that you're thinking, or is it something else?
Yeah, exactly. There are, I think, a lot of use cases where low code or no code automation would be beneficial.
Cool. And how are you liking Langchain and LangGraph so far? Like what sort of things, I think like in our minds, there's kind of like two types of agents. One is basically like a state machine plus sort of, where you basically like model out all the execution states, and then the LLM can determine at the margins how to transition between the states. And then the other one is kind of like the quote unquote like full agent approach, where it's like you just have one state. It's just like a observe, act. I forget what it is. The kind of like classic like OODA loop, if you're familiar with that term, where like at each at each iteration, the agent's like, here's the state of the world, here's what I just did, here was the result of my last action. Let me decide what to act again. Like which flavor of agent are you building currently?
Actually on semi-automatic agents for boilerplate code. So for example, you're
Okay.
building a project from scratch, you know what framework you want to use, you know the library, then you click this option and everything for starting up this project will be written in the background. For example, installing these libraries in the background in the terminal. I don't need to input my shell command or something. Always happens automatically. But Later on, I think if I start a project with the design document,
Yep.
like literary programming example for my Cody or
Yep.
whatever LLM or agentic behavior could skimming through this document,
Yep.
generating a plan, and agents will execute this plan, and the human in the loop is then for refinements or for validation, correction, and so on.
Yeah, that's
Like
interesting.
like Devin, you know,
Yep.
Devin AI. Yeah.
Yep. And would you want to still be inside your editor at that point, or would you want it to kind of like be outside your editor and, you know, in an environment that's like completely separate from a human coding environment?
Both of worlds, for example, in the beginning without the editor environment, but later on for refinement or where human in the loop is important, and I can
Yeah,
tweak my code.
that makes a ton of sense. Cool.
Cool. Oh, awesome questions. Yeah, personally, I'm very looking forward to the API myself. The next question we have might be a quick one. Can we generate embeddings with external tools like Ollama in the near term?
That is an interesting question. So you want to like generate your own embeddings and then use that as sort of like the the thing that's used for nearest neighbor search for context? I think where the architecture is trending, that might be a little bit tough because we're trying to roll embeddings into more layers of the stack, like incorporate them in like the re-ranking layer. And so if you had like custom embeddings, that might throw off different parts of the architecture. But I'm curious as to, you know, like why you want to generate them yourselves. Is there something that you're not seeing in the kind of like vanilla Cody embeddings that we can improve? We're always looking to improve that.
This question was also for me raised. I don't know what the chunking approach is behind, if it's chunks every 1,000 tokens or so. My approach
Yeah.
I would use would to be like a hierarchical approach in the scope of code. So I don't embed
Yeah.
my code for 1,000 tokens in some, and I would
Yep.
embed my code for classes or global scope or fine-grained scope more. So if the code is documented well, for example, if not, then Cody could help. And in my experience, the embeddings are much more reliable.
The ones that you're generating yourself.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Can you share like what sort of like chunking strategy you're using and what sort of like model you're using? Like maybe there's something that we could learn there and incorporate into our embeddings.
Yeah, and also like when you say reliable, what exactly you mean by reliable? Because that also gives us a intuition on like, oh, I mean, how do you call it? Like, oh, this embedding model is better because it's able to do this versus not. That'll also be a very helpful input for us.
My experience, I tried OpenAI, the text ADA model. I tried the Snowflake embedding model, but the best model is the what's called the Nomad from Ollama. I don't know the name not right now.
Cool.
But this gives
Nomad
you...
embed tech.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Cool.
So,
We'll check that out. Have we looked at that, Rishab?
So we're aware of it, but I don't think like we've evaluated specifically embeddings. Yeah.
Cool.
This is great feedback, a new embedding model for us to look at.
Yeah.
Sweet. The next question, and this is now we're reading questions that have come from the live chat. Is there a plan to incorporate something like Anthropic's new artifacts that they made for Claude?
Yeah, that's interesting. So artifacts being kind of like images and like other things that get generated and like persist in the workspace and can be referenced. Is that kind of the idea? Or is the question more like, will Cody evolve toward that kind of like UI, like user experience, where it's kind of like this workspace?
So this question was asked by Coach D Runs, and I think they are still in the audience. So, Coach, if you'd like to come up on stage, we'd love to um, talk more. But it looks like you replied, developing the UI idea is
Okay,
along the lines of
cool.
what he was
Yeah,
asking.
I think that fits into this like multimodal interaction paradigm. I think the folks in Anthropic did a really, really good job of presenting like a very compelling, I guess, like user experience for how that might work. That's kind of like it gets us out of the strict like back and forth chat paradigm, where you can have like this thing that you're kind of like iterating on in real time. I think that might be a model for how we approach multimodal and Cody as well.
Right on. And
Cool.
so similarly but different, with Code WP, one can in chat tell the AI to create an entire WordPress plugin, and the AI will create multiple files within the same collection or directory and its subdirectories. When
Yeah.
telling it to edit or update something, it can go through the different files to make sure that those changes are made with just one chat instruction. Is this something that will come to Cody, and is that even feasible within VS Code?
Yeah, it's definitely feasible, and I think this goes along the lines of like the boilerplate plus generation idea, kind of like what Pranova is talking about, where you have Cody generate the boilerplate and maybe set up the development environment. That is like a use case we've considered in the past, but we haven't really built anything serious there. But maybe maybe it's time to revisit that, because I think that is a very common use case for LLMs. I think, especially given that like LMs are trained on like a huge corpus of open source material, I think they're really, really good at generating boilerplatey things for different plugin ecosystems. And so we recently introduced this thing called Open Context, which is an open source protocol for bringing in different sources of context as a context provider to Cody. So think documentation or chat logs or production logs, things like that, like any sort of technical context that might be relevant to the thing that you're trying to accomplish in your editor. But in particular, that could be a nice way to bring in different library sources into Cody. So I think there's a world where we could build up like a library of popular libraries or frameworks, WordPress, React, Svelte, like anything that has a community around it and is a sort of like way of building or framework for building things. And maybe we could use the combination of like the context enhanced code generation that we already do and combine it with these other sources to make a really good kind of domain specific boilerplate generator. I don't know. Does that sound of interest to folks?
Sounds interesting to me. I think for me, the thing that it always boils down to when having an LLM edit multiple files is being able to quickly parse all the files that were changed and what the changes were. Just because I'd like to validate that it didn't change something in some obscure file that breaks
Yeah.
the rest of the application. And I think that's it's more of like a UI problem for the developer than the LLM being able to make edits to multiple files.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And like we have demo paths too that use, for instance, like Cody on the web or S0 to zero shot applications. We just have never productized this. And maybe we should.
For sure. Cool. The next question. Have you considered adding the ability to chain custom commands or adding agentic coding function calling with read write on files in context?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So we're actually working on something that's kind of experimental right now that does exactly that. So I don't know if I have the, oh, I can't share my screen. Oh, I need to open system settings. Hold on. I need to leave and then pop back.
Mac permission settings. Fun stuff. We'll give Yang a minute to come back. But really, really good questions. Keep them coming.
Okay, I think I'm back. Let's see, share the right screen. That way more. Yeah, I think that is. Okay, can people see this?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So we're working on something right now that is like chaining together multiple steps. The working title for this is Minion. I don't think that's what we're actually going to go with, but that's just what we call it right now. So the basic idea is you describe a thing that you want to add or a change you want to make into the code. So let's say I wanted to add a new @mention provider to Cody chat. And then let's say I want it to use the prefix trigger felt kit, because that's the maybe it's like felt docs or something. So I can ask this to do that. It will go through kind of like a multi-step process, first restating the problem. I think we'll probably make this editable because sometimes, it restates it in a way that's slightly incorrect. But assuming that the restatement is accurate, it then goes and pulls relevant context from the code base. So this is using search and LLMs to kind of comb through the relevant snippets in your code base. You can go through and kind of like inspect them. I think we'll also want to make this editable in the future so that you can kind of like manually change the list of context that's relevant. And then it generates an execution plan. So right now, this is mostly like a manual checklist, but I think still useful because this actually gives you a kind of like a good reference point for like executing a coherent plan for an issue. Like, I don't know if people here get lost in the weeds from time to time. I know oftentimes I have this experience of like, I go and try to implement a feature or fix an issue, and then it turns out like there's a like mini side quest I have to solve. And then once I go down that rabbit hole, it's hard to pop back up to the big picture context. So we're thinking like, hey, maybe it'd be useful to have the LM generated execution plan for you that you can kind of like manually check off. And then what we want to do is start automating more and more pieces of this plan, starting with the things that are most toilsome to the human and most easily dealt with by the LM. So for instance, if you wanted to update the changelog, this thing will go and automatically apply a changelog update based on the description of the issue that you wrote up. And there's more we want to do here. So we're working on automation steps for kind of like simple code changes as well. And we would like to feed that back into like an evaluation loop. It's still quite early, but I think early signs are positive. The context quality matters a lot to making this converge quickly. And I would say, like, unlike some of the like offline agents, like Devin or its kind of like variants, we think that like this is a nicer approach because it's actually in your editor, and so you can actually give kind of high fidelity feedback. So there's another version of this where it actually observes the actions you're taking in the editor. So if, for instance, you don't like what it did for one of the steps, you go in and like type a manual change yourself, it will remember that and use it as context for kind of future movements. So there's many directions to explore here. For now, it is still experimental, but it's something that we're excited about. We've seen the potential with these kind of like single hop requests that we've made more and more reliable with the benefit of context. And I think we're excited about composing multiple steps together. And I think the fact that we've invested so much in kind of like the single hop reliability means that the multi-step stuff will be a lot more reliable.
Right on. I am super excited to play around with this multi-step approach. And yeah, I think the big difference here is being able to, be still driving, be still operating at the wheel and having full control to kind of guide the LLM and work together much closer. Awesome. Rashab, I think this question might be interesting for you. How much pre-processing is done before you pass stuff into the model? Like, say if I have a big Flask file, does Cody read the whole file or send only a few lines and iterate on it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like we spend a lot of time in working on the right context. The right context could be, again, not just the files which are open in your editor, not just the current file, but it could be a file which is hidden away in a big repository. So the way right now most of our context sources work is we look at your files, we chunk them using some logic. So it could be a fixed set of lines in a chunk, or it could be like, hey, let's identify the semantic boundaries in the code. So here's a function, and we have like some regex to identify a function start and end. So basically we can go from like a big file of like 2,000, 3,000 lines into like maybe 10 different chunks, depending on the size and depending on the composition of file itself. And then essentially you're dealing with like a set of repository becomes a set of files, becomes a set of chunks. And then you can like index it using some like BM25 or like exact search, keyword search based chunking search approaches, or like embedding based approaches. And then that index is what the context sources then operate upon. So yeah, so the long story short, the answer then becomes the files get converted to chunks, the chunks get indexed, and then when you issue a query for chat, or even if you're completing like code completions, then you start using the adjacent code as a query, and then you start searching those indexes, and then you get like some context items to add together. So this is what's happening right now. What we are very excited about is how do we kind of bring in more context sources, especially as Biang was talking about open CTX, right? I mean, open context means we can start including non-code artifacts as well. So I mean, documentation and Jira issues and linear issues and a bunch of details around that. So then I think like this is where especially it becomes interesting, because hey, I mean, do you want to use this code snippet, or do you want to use the corresponding documentation I have, or do you want to like look at this README which I have on Google Docs, and then combining the content from all of them and then sending it to the LLM? I think that's the future which we are headed towards. So yeah, if you guys have any crazy ideas on, oh, this is how we want to use open context, and this is where applications I see on like, here is the kind of questions which is not just useful from code, but also I have a couple of other documentation or other like context sources available. I would love for you to pick up the top n relevant items and then use in the prompt, because I think Cody can get a much better answer if it has this information versus not. So yeah, if you guys have any ideas on that, that would be amazing.
Right on. And we had one follow-up question to that, which was how much of this processing is done on the server versus locally within the IDE?
Yeah, so I think like it's primarily right now on the client, but also we're debating and discussing always like what's the trade-off on like doing on the client side, doing it on the server side. For example, local files, right? If you have a file which you've just edited, if you have files which are open on your tabs, multiple tabs on your IDE right now, so those are information which are much easily available for local, like in the editor context source, right? But then in the future, you can imagine like some big ML model which probably needs a lot more server-side processing. Like I think even when Pranava was talking about embeddings, right? You do send the code to OpenAI servers to embed if you are using OpenAI embeddings, for example, right? So I think the question then becomes, does the context source need for us to be hosting it on the server versus like how much can we pull off from the client itself? So right now, like we're pretty like client heavy, but then we keep on discussing on a regular basis, like what's the right trade-off, how much of the client logic should be how much of the context logic should be in the client versus not. And again, the local client does bring in useful information, especially like real time, right? As in when we start looking at your real time in like changes and like edits and start looping that into context, I think those probably are still going to be like very heavy living on the client side for us.
Right
Actually,
on.
so I have a question for the audience here. I'm curious as to like how people found out about Cody. What was like the channel that made you aware of it, and when did you first try it out? You can answer in the chat, and we can kind of move on to the next question.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know. Twitter. Cool. So The next question, what is the context length of Cody? I have really big files, over 2,000 lines, and working with Olama and Cody is a pain. The pre-processing doesn't happen, or I guess this is a follow-up. Does the pre-processing not happen when we work locally with Olama?
So we typically limit the context to like the effective window. So like what we found is like with the longer context models, context quality can almost always degrades, even if like a model advertises a very long window. The effective window that's actually where it can like reason effectively is more limited. So we do limit on that. We should be not just like jamming the entire file if it's a really big file into context. I guess there might be cases where we just like pull in like the currently open file where that does happen. And maybe those are like edge cases we need to catch and handle properly. As for Olama, I'm curious, like what models are you running with Olama? Maybe there's some case in the code that we haven't like attended to like the context window limit of that particular model properly. Like it could be the opposite issue where like a local model might have a smaller context window and we're actually trying to shove too much into it. So CodeGemma 7B. Okay. Interesting. And how long is the context window on that? Sorry, what was that screenshot that you just posted, the DJ? This is like it's like you hitting the token limit. Interesting.
The output, yeah.
Yeah, I guess like CodeGemma, I mean, it should have a large context window. I wonder if we can, I don't know, can you make a note to, I mean, that should be sufficient. I wonder if we can look into
We can do
this.
some digging. Yeah, I think we can, because we've had a few PRs from the Google team working on CodeGemma,
Okay.
make some suggestions and improvements. So we could definitely follow up on this one and see if if it's a bug on our end or if it's a model issue, and then kind of take it from there.
Cool.
Great. So we will follow up on CodeGemma. Stay tuned. The next question we had was using custom commands, or the ability to use custom commands with variable injection for enhanced shell commands, or the ability to reference files similar to the @mention command, multi-hop custom commands, chaining them, input. So for example, you give an input and then you run 3 custom commands to generate an output.
Yeah.
Question.
So can we have more customizable custom commands so that we can use more like custom shell commands? Yeah, that's something I want. I think we will eventually get to this. If you want to make like a PR for that, be happy to review that and accept that. And as far as chaining commands, I think what we see on the roadmap is like unifying commands with the Minion stuff that I demoed earlier, because all Minion is really just, I mean, it's kind of like a custom command that does multiple hops with the LLM. So I think we'll probably unify that experience at some point in the future, and then like all custom commands will kind of first of all like do the thing that they're designed to do, but also if you want to introspect as to like what's happening in that command, we're thinking like some sort of UI that visualizes the steps, even if it's just a single step of what it's doing, so that you have that ability to introspect.
Interesting. Cool. I think, and I think we talked a little bit about the chaining of custom commands in a previous question as well. So I think we can move on to the next one. Do we have a or plans to implement memory caching system to store already answered questions, dialogues about the code base, or snippets for a hierarchical RAG with knowledge graph. Is that something we're planning or working on, iterating on?
Yeah, so we do store chats. I don't think we store them for the purposes, like chat sessions are meant to be isolated so that like one chat session can't refer to others. Sort of by design, because sometimes you just want like a new session. You don't want the other context to kind of like bleed in. The hierarchical RAG stuff, we've played around with it a little bit. We've never been able to get it to work very well. I know there's been some research there that's shown some interesting results. I think the challenge with hierarchical RAG is like you lose some fidelity whenever you summarize things. And then I think there's a question in our minds of like how useful is like a really long conversation. Because a lot of the way in which we use Cody internally is kind of like, I want to do a thing, let me go do it. Now that I'm done with it, let's move on to the next thing. And it doesn't yet kind of like keep the entire session in memory. As we trend towards like more and more automation, we may revisit that, but it's also a bit of an open question, I think, like whether we want to fit that all into one giant context window, or whether it's more about just like building these composable blocks that are kind of like more or less independent and don't reference previous steps together. So if there's like a particular use case you have in mind, would love to hear more about it and kind of understand like what you're trying to solve for.
Definitely, and I think for me, the other thing to consider as well is, you know, your code base changes, and I would rather have the code base be the source of truth rather than a existing chat session where, you know, you might have asked something, gotten an answer that you were satisfied with at the time, but it changed, you know, a week down the line. You implemented a different class or a different library, and now that chat session is, you know, most likely no longer valid to your code base.
Yeah.
Cool. And then the final question we have so far is import-export of a single chat session feasible? For example, if we wanted to submit an issue report, being able to send the input and output. So can we export chat sessions?
Yeah, we should make that easier. I can't remember. I remember someone had a way to like export this. What we really should do is just build in like a feedback mechanism in the application. Where if you have like a poor experience, I mean, if you thumbs up or actually, do we still have the thumbs up, thumbs down? I guess we had that like in a very early version, and that was sort of like an in-app feedback mechanism. I don't think I've seen it in a while, but I don't remember. I don't recall explicitly removing it. But yeah, we should probably add back like a feedback mechanism in the application. Do people want to export chats for other reasons, or is it mainly just like, hey, here was a chat that didn't go so well, and I want to report it?
Yeah, let us know in the comments. And while we gather feedback for that, kind of a philosophical question. Do you believe that we are all LLMs at some level?
No, I think there's a lot more going on in the architecture of the brain than language models. That's my answer.
Yeah, I think like
Rashad, what do you think?
I'm really rooting for like the current like multi-headed attention way of training transformers is like a V.1 of what sophisticated neural model looks like. I think like I'm really hoping like a lot of architectural advances kind of come in the coming years ahead. And I think like we're way different. We are way more efficient than how some of these sparse neural models are. So yeah, I think like the current set of LLMs are maybe V.01 leading up to like how we operate in the brains. We all gotta wait for AGI to pop up, right? I mean, Cody will be here using AGI to help you do all these tasks. So yeah, we're just building our way to that.
Definition of
Got it,
AGI keeps shifting too. It's a moving target.
that is a fun dinner question.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see if we have any other questions. One person asked, what about the ability to pin chats or group them? Looks like people really want more control over stored like previous conversations.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd be curious to hear more of like what you want to do with chats. Like, is it some sort of workflow or like feature that you're building where you want to reference like, hey, I asked about this previously? Like what is this sort of like organizational structure that you want to impose over chat sessions? And can you talk about like how that fits into a desired workflow?
Looks like a couple people are typing, so we'll let them finish.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear this as well, because in search, in traditional web search, people do a lot of requerying. At Spotify as well, you go back to your like favorite artists and like search for the song all over again. So I'm wondering if some of the use cases here you guys have in mind are more about, hey, I mean, there's this piece of code which I got in chat and I'll probably reuse it again. And is that the reason, like reusing that search, reusing some snippets from that? Is that your motivation of going back to chat?
They said yep, but the person that asked the question is still typing. Oh, here we go.
UI
So
components. Okay, so you have like chat sessions that terminate with a generated UI component, and you want to be able to reference those generated UI components. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, I wonder if like some of these chat sessions, especially like some of the ones which I've been having with Cody as well, like, I mean, they do produce some artifact which I use in the code. So if that
Yeah.
artifact, I could save that artifact, I do imagine even myself going back and reusing a bit of that. Especially like, I mean, again, right? I mean, if let's say I'm working on an intent model, then that intent model will
Yeah.
have components, and I'll develop 2 other intent models in the next few weeks. So I'll probably reuse some of that. But I see the point on the reusable UI components here.
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, and
I guess
the
like the way I would
original
do that
post,
now is that if you have like a component library, like all the components that you want to make reusable, I would just like put in a file and then put that file in a repository that gets stored in Git, and then it would be like mentionable. But I suppose it's more work. Like maybe you want a more like ad hoc workflow.
Yeah, and the original poster, they said that their use case is they know that they've already asked this question and they just want to be able to reference it as opposed to kind of asking the same question over and over again.
Yeah, maybe create like a context provider for previous chats, so you can like tag previous chats. That'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think like this is where, I mean, as a user as well, right? I mean, depending on the LLM we use in chat, I think it got me like 3 iterations to make it ignore that other artifact and use this information and get this right. And then I know like, hey, it's gonna be a trial to like reuse and re-prompt it to like get that specific like implementation to be out. So I see like
this is kind of interesting. Like so where we think the like user mental model for chat is going to trend actually is like away from this like chat model and more towards this kind of like natural language terminal model. So like a thing that we've been thinking about for a while is in a given chat session, like the previous messages are kind of like included implicitly in the context because it's like the previous transcript. But if you think about it, it's kind of like a special case. It's like, maybe the previous question matters to the next question. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're on to like something completely new. And if you want to make Cody forget right now, you have to create a new session. But maybe there's a future where the tagging in of previous messages is an explicit option. So imagine, how like when you create a new chat now, automatically you get like the @repository name and the @current file thing, but you can delete them. We've thought about adding like an @prior message thing, which is on by default, so you still have like the default chat behavior, but like if you wanted to delete it and start a new session, you could. And maybe an evolution of that is like, if you wanted to tag some earlier message that's like far above in the transcript or in like another session, maybe you just tag that message, like it's an at message capability or something like that, or an at chat message.
Makes sense. Somebody suggested a Cody for Cody conversations.
Yeah, Cody's all the way down.
Cool. Cody's all the way down. I think we have time for just one more question, and I think Mark asked it here. Are we thinking about long-running terminal, the terminal that can perform the work you ask it to do?
Yeah, I think that's like it's like a rough idea that we have in our minds. It's like what I really want is like a single text box where I can just type anything into. Like the reason why Google is so wonderful is that it's one text box. You go to it for like 95% of the things that you want to do on the internet, and then you type that in. And we think Cody will trend that direction too. Like we have this vision that we call one box, where it's kind of like you know, it's a single text input that is the starting point for a bunch of different types of interaction, like code generation or asking a question, or maybe like a multi-step thing where it writes some code and then fixes it. And so that's the direction we're trending, and like chat and search and all the other, even like inline edits to some extent, maybe converges on this like single text input.
Yeah, I think that's. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I think
go for it.
that's a great idea, and like I've been building something like that, like on the side as well. And like I think where Cody really takes has an advantage is like all the context essentially. But
yeah,
so at our org, we've been building like lots of custom commands. Like for example, here's how to generate a unit test for our monorepo.
yeah.
So like we use Jest, we use Angular, we use Nest.js, we use all these things.
Yeah.
So like I think if there's a way to integrate those best practices with the agent that you're building,
Yeah.
that way like when you have your plan and you're executing something, then it's like, okay, you're executing tests in a way that will fit right in with what's there or
Yes.
what's not there. So like we have Reg, again, like we've tried like, okay, go get the context and try to use what's out there, but that might not be code that's actually well written. So I think it's better to be explicit and be like, okay, here's exactly how it should be built.
Totally. Are you in touch with our product team yet? We'd love to kind of like, if there's like specific custom commands that we can help support better, would love to get in touch.
I honestly
and put you in touch with.
I just started using Cody like yesterday.
Okay, cool.
I think we did chat with someone from you guys yesterday, but
yeah, were you at the event last night or?
Oh, my CEO chatted with someone at 5.
Okay, cool. Yeah, feel free to ping any of us if you have questions or feedback, or just like want help with the custom commands.
Okay. Yep.
We're very excited to kind of like work with people who are kind of like exploring that, and we're excited to learn about your use cases.
I think this could end up being a really solid product for sure.
Cool. Good to hear.
Right on. Cool. Well, we are just about at time. So, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and thank you so much for being part of the SourceGraph and Cody community. Before we close out the stream, the SourceGraph team wants to thank the following people who have made such great impacts to our community. Kinlo, check out his new Cody VS Code plugin, Kcoder. Pranova, who we've